Hey, it's Jordan with Status Coup. Democracy, air quotes, because we don't really have one, is supposedly on the line in this election, but Morning Joe thinks we should wait a week or two to decide whether President Biden, whose cognitive hardware is clearly malfunctioning, should step aside. Can't make this stuff up. Before we get to Morning Joe and Mika's delusion and denial, let's update you if you haven't seen, because now suddenly the media suddenly has all the information that apparently they didn't have before the debate. We'll get to that in another video about Biden's clear cognitive decline, shall we say. This is from the New York Times, which I suspect had this information well before the debate and just sat on it. Biden's lapses are said to be increasingly common and worrisome. In the weeks and months before President Biden's politically devastating performance on the debate stage in Atlanta, several current and former officials and others who encountered him behind closed doors noticed that he increasingly appeared confused or listless, or would lose the thread of conversations. Like many people his age, Mr. Biden, 81, has long experienced instances in which he mangled a sentence, forgot a name, or mixed up a few facts, even though he could be sharp and engaged most of the time. But in interviews, people in the room with him more recently said that the lapses seemed to be growing more frequent, more pronounced, and more worrisome. The uncomfortable occurrences were not predictable, but seemed more likely when he was in a large crowd or tired after a particularly bruising schedule. In the 23 days leading up to the debate against former President Trump, Biden jetted across the Atlantic Ocean twice for meetings with foreign leaders and then flew from Italy to California for a splashy fundraiser, maintaining a grueling pace that exhausted even much younger aides. Biden was drained enough for the back-to-back trips to Europe that his team cut his planned debate preparation by 2 days so he could rest at his home in Delaware before joining advisors at Camp David for rehearsals. The preparations, which took place over 6 days, never started before 11 in the morning, and Biden was given time for an afternoon nap each day, according to a person familiar with the schedule. I don't want to minimize, old age. It will happen to me. It happens to everybody. Even if you don't have, something serious like Alzheimer's or dementia, you could forget things, lose your train of thought, etc. I'm not diagnosing Biden, however, but he won't give his cognitive tests from the last few years, which I think is a red flag. I also think it should have been a major red flag that the media kind of glossed over when he declined to do an interview on the Super Bowl, which would have given him an audience of over 100 million people. Kind of unheard of for presidents to decline that. That should have been a major red flag. But what I find pretty illuminating about this, he's the president. You're going to be traveling all over the world. Sure, you need a nap, etc. But there was at least a week in between him returning, actually over a week, him returning from his, global trips and the debate. And he was given an extra 2 days to rest at home. And in his debate prep, which they cut 2 days short, he was basically prepping starting at 11 in the morning, taking a nap soon after that. This does not sound like somebody who the problem is a stutter. It sounds like someone who is suffering from some type of cognitive issue or cognitive/physical issue from old age. And I really, really wonder, the media just found this information out suddenly within the last 5 days. I find that very hard to believe. What do you think? Let me know in the comments. But there's other reports coming from the White House that people are freaking the fuck out. Headline, freaking the fuck out. Turmoil in the Biden White House. I'll get to the most important part. Biden's performance at the debate has left many of his own aides worried about his mental fitness and angry about what they see as a lack of candor from Biden's senior aides. Quote, "It's the first topic of every conversation," one senior official in the White House said. Senior leadership has given us nothing. To act like it's business as usual is delusional. Another official put it more bluntly. Everyone is freaking the fuck out. Well, everyone is freaking the fuck out except for Morning Joe and MSDNC, who still, despite what all of America saw, hell, all of the world saw, is trying to gaslight. Well, not all of them, but at least Mika, trying to gaslight us democracy is on the line. But we should give it some time. Wait to see how this all plays out. You can't make this stuff up.
I just have a few thoughts after the first hour and what I just saw. You know, after a moment like this, only President Biden can tell us what needs to happen next or can show us. And I think a lot of this surmising out loud, whether he should or shouldn't, is kind of useless. I know we're in a time crunch, but this needs a week or two so everyone can see what they need to see. We can't surmise. And yes, there's a lot of criticism now that he's saying it was jet lag. I brought this up earlier. It was flying across 12 time zones when your son was convicted on felony counts that wouldn't bring any others to court, but your son is convicted. So that emotional trauma happening while he's abroad. So yes, Hunter's staying close with his dad right now, showing he's okay, showing they're okay. I don't see any problem with that. And again, compare all of that to the alternative who moved his family in to work in the administration. It just feels like, number one, people need to slow down. This is a very delicate situation, and there are fair questions out there. But the noise and the move to move him out when we hadn't had a chance to really recoup and see whether this was episodic or not, and also the lack of balance at the alternative, at looking at the alternative, where there may be 1,000 reasons why an editorial board would have said that Donald Trump should step out of the race, and yet that just never happens.
There is so much to respond here. But first, just a thought exercise. Can you imagine for a second, during the Democratic primary of 2020, if Bernie Sanders was on the debate stage and had even 1/10 of the cognitive meltdown that Joe Biden just had in the presidential debate? Forgot a couple things, slurred a few words, lost his train of thought. Do you think Mika would be saying, you know what, this is a delicate situation, let's give it a week or two? They would be coming with pitchforks for Bernie. But Mika Brzezinski and her husband apparently are very close friends with the president. Joe Scarborough, who's on vacation this week, it's been reported, has spoken with the president on the phone many times. Mika says, I know we're in a time crunch, but we need a week or two. Well, is democracy on the line or is it not? Because if the house is on fire, then you don't say, let's wait a week or two to call the fire department. You do it right away. And I actually believe, even though I don't actually believe we have a full democracy, we live in the United Corporations of America. Read the Princeton study from 2014 that clearly said we live in an oligarchy, not a democracy. And over 50% of the time, the majority will, the public policy that the majority want does not get enacted. But the majority of the time, the public policy the donors and the wealthy want does get enacted. That's not a democracy. That's an oligarchy. With that said, there is real threats to the democratic elements we have. What's being lost right now in all of this coverage of Biden's clear, if you want to call it decline, I would call it more than a decline. Donald Trump really is a danger. I'm not telling you who to vote for, but I would be abdicating my responsibility to minimize the danger of Trump, particularly with this new Supreme Court ruling, which is a disaster. The Supreme Court just ruled, basically, presidents could be kings or queens, and put out this very vague ruling that really doesn't distinguish what is official presidential activity versus unofficial. And they basically have created a quagmire where it could be drawn out in the courts forever and ever, what's official versus what's unofficial. Meanwhile, presidents can break the law, which Donald Trump clearly doesn't mind doing. I mean, I'll just read this from you, from Axios, because if Democrats and Mika actually genuinely believe democracy is at risk, and I think there's a clear threat with Trump, then we don't have a week or two to decide this. It's already July. The Democratic National Convention is next week. Behind the curtain, Trump's imperial presidency in waiting. Former President Trump, if reelected, plans to immediately test the boundaries of presidential and governing power, knowing the restraints of Congress and the courts are dramatically looser than during the first term. His advisors tell us. It's not just the Supreme Court ruling on Monday that presidents enjoy substantial legal immunity for actions in office. Trump would come to office with a cabinet and staff pre-vetted for loyalty and a fully compliant Republican coalition in Congress devoid of critics in positions of real power. That's a big reason many Democrats worry Biden is making one of the biggest gambles in U.S. history by staying in the race amid acute concerns about his age. By the way, the concerns aren't about his age. The concerns are about his brain. There's plenty of older people, including Bernie Sanders. Yeah, you're old, you get tired, but they're still articulating very well. They're still energetic. Bernie's barnstorming the country, still doing events. It's not just that he's old. Clearly, there's something going on cognitively. No shame in it. It happens to a lot of older people, including probably people watching or your loved ones. But there is shame if you know this as the president or your family knows this as the president and you're willing to roll the dice and give up democracy, in your words, to a wannabe dictator. Trump promises an unabashedly imperial presidency, one that would turn the Justice Department against critics, deport millions of people in the U.S. illegally, slap 10% tariffs on thousands of products, and fire perhaps tens of thousands of government staff deemed insufficiently loyal. He'd stretch the powers of the presidency in ways not seen in our lifetime. He says this consistently and clearly, so it's not conjecture. You might like this or loathe this, but it's coming fast and furious if he's elected. Thanks to Monday's Supreme Court ruling, Trump could pursue his plans without fear of punishment or restraint. There's also another element that, I mean, it just is what it is. We know about Project 2025, which, again, is basically Trump's and the Republicans' plans. I believe the Republican operatives that are pulling Trump's strings, because I don't think Trump is too educated on public policy in the first place. But Project 2025, if you've read the reports, it has 4 pillars. Restore the family as the centerpiece of American life and protect our children. Okay, let's go back to the 1950s while we're at it. Dismantle the administrative state and return self-governance to the American people. So basically take a machete to government. Defend our nation's sovereignty, borders, and bounty against global threats. Lock down the country, no immigration, deport undocumented immigrants. I believe they would even try to deport, political enemies, whether it's pro-Palestinian activists, pro-immigration activists, you name it, pro-choice activists. Secure our God-given individual rights to live freely, what our Constitution calls the blessing of liberty. And basically the Supreme Court ruling, in my view, I'm not a legal scholar, just gave Trump a get out of jail free card to do whatever he wants. And if you want to see, if you think I'm dramatizing here, here is the head of the Heritage Foundation on Trump's Project 2025. Here's what he is saying. And again, this is being treated fairly normal. And I believe could be ushered in if Trump gets reelected.
That we are in the process of the Second American Revolution, which will remain bloodless if the left allows it to be.
He's talking about Project 2025, which I just gave you the details of. The Second American Revolution will remain bloodless if the left allows it to be. Translated, stay in your corners while we loot and gut the government and make this a Christo-fascist country. And if you don't, might get a little bloody. It's not an endorsement of Biden, but again, I'd be abdicating my responsibility if I ignored and didn't tell you these are real threats posed by Trump and the cabal of Christo-fascists around him. So if Mika and Morning Joe actually believe democracy is at grave peril, yeah, we don't have a week or two to wait. Unreal.